Yes.
Thank you so much. All right. So,
Yeah,
oh, sorry, I'm getting an echo off somebody. Okay, that sounds fab. Today I've got my James Hutton Institute hat on. I was principal investigator on this project, Trustable AI in Mapping, which was shortened to TAiM. I'm reporting on behalf of a consortium. It includes space tech companies, EOLAS Insight and Ian. It was the lead there, Amanos Analytics, Agrimetrics, nature restoration project developer Highlands Rewilding. So as you know, I have another hat working with Highlands Rewilding. And we also work with ACOM and Scottish government departments as well. So what I know from my work at Highlands Rewilding is that accurate and reliable maps of natural capital are really vital for underpinning investment in and management of nature restoration projects. Private businesses from farm to finance need to crowd in to support the public sector in meeting that 13 to 15 billion pound finance gap that we've got to meet in order to reach biodiversity uplift and carbon sequestration targets. So here are some of the reasons why private companies might invest in nature markets. These are well known to us all. They might be preparing for complying with regulation, whether that's voluntary or mandatory, TNFD. They might be seeing commercial opportunities. So some of those projects that all the ferns research projects have gone through. There might be just the reason of pure investment, perhaps a financial sector institution like local government pension fund is beginning to get pushed by its clients to make more investments. But if all of those companies who are used to kind of investing in things like technology suddenly get faced with a nature-based project, they kind of have an expectation around the same sort of data. So they want to see that data is decision grade, it's high fidelity, that we can kind of prove enough data to show a high integrity project, and that means that they want to see sort of monitoring, reporting and verification, MRV. So maps of natural capital, of natural assets are needed, and they're needed at a scale that is probably a bit prohibitive to collect data from if you were doing it by field work alone. So we think that AI technologies offer significant benefits to the environmental sector because they'll automate some of those routine tasks and eliminate the need for manual mapping. But then, of course, the desire is that that data has high integrity. So what are we talking about when we say AI in mapping? The term artificial intelligence has become pretty synonymous with large language models and natural language processing. ChatGPT's the best known, but most tech companies have their own models. It's not this. This is what happened when we held a workshop for this project in February. We set it all up on Eventbrite and with our own kind of email lists. The very next day on the internet, this appeared. It's not written by us, it's just been found by the Maps GPT bot, and it's definitely incorrect. At one point in the description it says our experts will guide you. So we certainly didn't write that, but the large language model of Maps GPT did. So they obviously provide natural language access to large volumes of data and present it in a simple, accessible, confident manner. It's not this. It is more like, hang on, that one. Yep. It's more like the type of machine learning that we've been using for remotely sensed data. It's image classifiers, it's machine vision, computer vision, it's object detection, semantic segmentation, and all of those things apply to satellite, aerial, and drone imagery. These machine learning approaches have been widely used over the past few decades, particularly in academia. And deep learning is increasing the power and coverage of maps generated this way. So that's what we mean by AI in mapping. The use of it increasingly scaling up traditional assessments, and those AI and machine learning models working together with the satellite imagery and LiDAR data. So AI derived maps include things like national and global land cover maps. This is UK CEH's land cover map of 2022 to 2023. This is Living England's habitat map, and what it does is it publishes how correct it is in a confusion matrix. And I might ask Ian to step in here because I'm a bit of a dunce on what a confusion matrix is.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. So the point here was really just to say that Living England's habitat map, it's got a really great accuracy assessment report that they produce. Goes alongside the data, and what they've done is they've taken thousands of points that they've used to train their models, and they've taken those points, held back some from the training of the model to use those points as validation to see when the model then predicts how right or wrong it is. It's a really thorough and consistent piece of work that they've done. But what I would say is that the problem of this approach, and this is a standard approach across pretty much all machine learning applied to mapping, is but you keep these disparate points and you want them to be spread as widely as possible across your landscape. And then you just look at how well the model does at predicting the held back points. But there's no connection between those points. They don't sit next to each other. They don't tell you anything about how the actual maps on the ground look. From a simple confusion matrix, you can start to say something about which classes tend to be confused for each other, but that's about it. Taking that matrix on the right and translating it onto the map on the left, which is my site. Let's say I'm trying to restore around Lake Windermere. I've actually got quite a job to do to take that table and start thinking about, well, where are the features on the ground that have classes that are next to each other that are confused, for example. So if I've got bog that confuses with, I don't know, let's say heathland, and there's quite a big confusion there, that's quite a problem because those two classes are tend to be found right next to each other. What if it's two classes that aren't found next to each other? I don't know, like seaside, what I'm trying to look for, beach and, I don't know, montane habitats, for example, even though there might be some spectral confusion. And that is actually a real thing that did happen in some of the earlier versions of the Living England map. I know contextually that even though it says it's beach on top of the mountain, it's probably not a beach, it's probably a montane habitat. So the confusion matrix doesn't help you actually think about functionally how that map's going to work over my site and how these classes are going to blend into each other. That's kind of the point here, I think, with this slide.
Fab, thanks, Ian. So as well as the land cover, AI derived maps include things like soil carbon stocks. This is a tree canopy height map that's been made by Meta. And what we can see here is that there's a myriad of AI algorithms and data sets and methodologies that have all been pulled together to make this map. This map is able to show different scales and resolutions. We've got the satellite image showing that view from 350 kilometers away. We've got the aerial view showing from about 1 kilometer away, and then the LiDAR sort of showing close up 300 meters or less away, and all of those kind of brought together, these multiple sources brought together to characterize Earth more completely for us in map form. So what also happens in AI maps is that models, machine learning models also come in. We've got random forests, KNN classifiers, and deep learning computer vision models like YOLO or Dino2 brought in. So this is helping train and validate the data and the predictions, but it's adding that complexity and another level of potential for error. So this is a typical AI mapping workflow. We start at the left and take in large volumes of unstructured data and transform it into the usable insights, the map output on the right. The training data is Earth observation and geospatial data. That's what we're inputting. That's cleaned and prepared and manipulated and split then into the training and testing sets. And it's improved through the quality assurance, in this case, a human in the loop, and ends up with that output. But errors arrive at each step in this diagram and this pipeline. And what happened when we had conversations with map users who were part of our Trustable AI mapping project was that they revealed quite a lot of distrust in the way that AI derived maps came together because of these sort of extra areas where error occurs. So they also felt that when developers of maps they talked about the characteristics of the map in very different ways, product to product. There was no sort of way of comparing the way that map producers were describing their products or describing their methodologies. And that's not surprising. It's due to IP considerations. If you're a commercial organization, you don't want to necessarily divulge what your methodology is. And then accuracy, well, that's always assessed against the subset of the training data. But if there are then errors in that training data, that would pass through to the accuracy analysis as well. And of course, if you're only considering the final map output, all of those sources of error that can happen in those earlier stages aren't considered. So just to kind of sum up with what the problem was that we were solving then, it's not just those errors in the maps, it's also errors that happen because nature's chaotic. Ecologists use pretty complicated and specialist measurements, methodologies, and classification typologies. So there's a lot to get muddled up here. And this is a really great quote from Frug and colleagues who point out in this paper that was published last November in Humanities and Social Sciences. Trust in AI heavily depends on the user's perception of an AI system's ability, which depends on the quality of the input data, the mathematical problem representation, and the algorithms used in decision making. So, are digital maps trustable? Well, we've seen that the quality metrics are produced by reserving the training data and using that for human machine comparison, but it doesn't include those errors introduced in the initial training data creation. And then to provide accurate quality measures for the AI mapping, we need to know various other things, and we need to consider various other things. So the AI algorithm error, the geospatial errors, the ecological errors, the temporal errors, and the errors in the reference framework. So it doesn't sound very cheery at the moment, does it? But don't worry, because our consortium came together and we really felt that the best approach for validation, for better trustability in AI generated maps, was to compare map outputs against independent assessments of ground conditions. So for this comparison to be fair, it must be done on the same terms of the map, so at the same spatial resolution, using the same measurement and classification schema. So the website that is the project output, trustable-mapping.xyz, provides information on our methodology, on the sites and surveys that we did, and it has a portal that allows you to submit your maps for evaluation with the accuracy framework. You can also be walked through all of the kind of project outputs and work that we did at that website. So the framework has 2 user journeys. You might be a producer of an AI map, but you also might just be a user, and you can then evaluate the quality of the output of the map against the field validation data that we collected from 8 sites spanning Scotland that we can see on this map here. Some were James Hutton Institute sites, Balruddery and Glensoch. There were 3 Highland rewilding sites, Tavialic on the west, Bunloit along Loch Ness, and Beldorney in Aberdeenshire. And then we also found some shoreline and intertidal landscapes at Annan and Caerlaverock in the south. We did 3 main types of survey. We took habitat surveys across the whole site, National Vegetation Classification and UK HAB, and then we did detailed surveys of smaller sample areas for key habitat types, woodland, grassland, peatland and salt marsh, and then remotely piloted aerial LiDAR drone surveys. I'll just quickly whiz through what surveys we undertook. So that MVC, that was over 17,000 different areas of distinct vegetation communities, and that gets sort of represented in this lovely artistic looking map. And we did a full NBC survey of the Tavialic estate, really absolutely fascinating. The UK HAB survey included some soil sampling, and that was done by Amanos. Sorry, I did say I'd rush through this, but it's because we want to get to the interesting bit at the end. Grassland surveys, W, Transx, recording type, condition, percentage of bracken cover, percentage of damaged ground, and so on. And then 1 meter squared quadrats, recording species richness, evenness, Shannon diversity index, and so on. And we did 275 quadrats there. And that's a little bit more on the grassland surveys. 31 fields were walked across 3 different sites. That's enough detail on that. Peatland, we did 4 meter long peat depth probes and used a 50 meter sampling grid, and that was done at 2 estates. And that was condition as well. Was it near natural? Was it modified? Was it drained, eroding? And we surveyed 7 locations at Bunlight and Beldorney for that. On Saltmarsh, these are intertidal wetland habitats and have importance, probably recognised by the work being done on the Saltmarsh Code at the moment. So the condition factors might be grazing on Saltmarsh, and again we did transect and quadrat surveys there. We also undertook the LiDAR surveys, so here we are with a remotely piloted drone, and here's some of the flights that we undertook at the areas that we were looking at. So these are always surveys that are restricted by the line of sight by the drone operator, but we managed to get kind of 500-meter radius surveys on all of the sites as well, resulting in maps, LiDAR results that look like this. And yes, that does play fantastic. So really giving a sense of the tree canopy, the height across different contours, the different species in the mix there. And then we used downstream processing with the LiDAR drones software to generate metrics like canopy height and plant area index as well. So when we're thinking about who could be the Trustable mapping portal users, we're very much thinking of two user journeys, as I said before, either map users who want to know whether the AI generated map they're looking at is trustable, and that might be land managers, consultants, ecologists, project developers, and then map developers, map producers who want an independent validation of their output. So that's industry and it's academia. So Ian, do you want to take over for a bit and talk about the framework itself?
Sure, absolutely. So yes, as Hannah says, the idea is that we're trying to create a portal where we have high quality data for these sites. It can be habitat mapping or something like tree cover or tree height or any sort of types of data that are feeding into national capital reports.
Ian, could you just move your mic
to?
Yeah, brilliant.
Sorry, is that better?
Yeah.
Too high. There we go. So we've got our field sites. If you have data for that field site, you can bring it and test the map. That is one of the things to say here, is that the point to bring in independent validation data means that we have validated at these 6 sites, these 8 sites. Of course, your map has to overlap that site. So if you're a map producer, then you'll need to run your algorithm over one of the sites that has habitats or data sets that match the types of data that your algorithm detects. If you're a map user, it's really going to be most relevant for some sort of national scale map. Either way, you've kind of got a similar kind of work process to go through the portal. Everybody can upload a map file with some context data. So if you've got a map data set, you should know something about that map. You should be able to say, well, this is where I got it from. If they're using, hopefully they should be using like some sort of published reference framework for the ecosystems. So you say, well, this is the ecosystem schema that's being applied here. This is the published resolution. Here's the metadata. You just bring that stuff together and upload it for one of the selected sites. In the background, we then do some offline comparison of the AI map against the field data. And this is the thing that I think is quite different about our approach here. One of the problems we have is there's any number of ecosystem systems or schemas out there. You know, in Scotland alone, you've got UNIS, you've got UK HAB, you've got UK BAP, you've got NVC, you've got phase 1 that can all be used. it'd be really difficult. You could do it, but it'd be really difficult for the test site to collect everything in every single system if we're just talking about habitats. What we've done though is we've used the fact that all these different ecosystem schemas, habitat classification schemas, have published relationships between them that say how to translate this class to that class. So we've done a lot of work in the background to collect those mappings. We've collected most of our sites with UKHAB, and we understand how to translate that to BAP, to UNIS, to NVC, etc. So if your map's been collected in one of them, we can then do that translation, take our field data, translate it to the same schema as the map's been collected in, translate it to the same resolution as the map, and then do some comparison. I'll give you an example of how that looks in practice, but what we're trying to do is to give the map the best chance of succeeding. That's what I'm trying to say. So if someone's mapping a polygon at 500 meters, 500 meter resolution, there's no point then comparing it against a UAV scale map because you're going to be getting it wrong. But if you average together the UAV data and say, well, taking that big area, what's the most likely class that we would have come up with from our ground data, given your schema, given your resolution? That's the kind of mapping we do here. So yeah, thanks. That's great. Yeah, let's skip on the slide. So you've got in the case here, we've got Scottish land cover map, which is in the top left there, which is in the UNIS system. And we've translated our field validation data, which was collected in UKHAB at a very fine resolution. We've translated that up to the 20 meter pixels and found the closest mapping for each habitat class. So this has meant there's some compromises. One of the things that happens between UNIS and UKHAB is UNIS talks about grasslands in terms of wetness, dry, wet, mesotrophic, etc. UKHAB talks about grasslands in terms of alkalinity, from acid to alkaline, improved, that sort of thing. These two systems don't map directly, so what we've had to do is say, well, all we can say to compare these things is look at grasslands. We can say it's a grassland, compare it to another grassland. Other things have got much more direct comparisons, like raised and blanket bogs as a UNIS class that we can directly map onto UKHAB. You might also see that things like Scots pine woodland, we can do direct comparisons of the water classes. So we kind of match all that stuff up, create a field validation map at the same spatial resolution. And then in the right-hand side, this then lets us do some different types of comparison for the accuracy. So we can say, we have this concept of match with the dominant class in the pixel. We've got really fine scale data, which has been mapped down to the meter with polygons. If you've got a 20 meter pixel, well, we look at by coverage, what's the dominant class in the pixel? And it goes blue if the classes match. That's good, tick. You're saying it's this, we're saying it's that, it's the same thing, tick. If there's no match, then as the dominant class doesn't match, there's no other sets of matches, red. Then we get these intermediate classes. Blue says there's a match with a subdominant class in the pixel. So your map didn't pick up the dominant thing, but it picked up something else that's represented in that pixel. So it's kind of, it's a believable kind of thing. So that happens particularly at the edges of habitats. So if you've got an area of woodland, and then you've got an area of grassland, and you've got a pixel which lies on the boundary between them, actually you might not match the fact that it's mostly a woodland pixel, but you've picked up grassland in there. That's not too bad an error to have made. So you'll see that light blue often forms along the edges of habitats. It also shows areas in the light blue with lots of habitat complexity, where things are actually quite difficult to determine on the ground as well. So you can see those structures. The other thing we have is matched with a neighbor class in the hierarchy. So these classification systems are hierarchical. So you might have different types of grassland, but they're all a grassland. So here it's what's happened in those big orange patches is an awful lot of the map there has been just classified as some form of mixed or coniferous woodland. On the ground, a lot of that is actually Scots pine woodland. Now, separating Scots pine from coniferous woodland is quite a difficult thing. So it's not too bad. They've said it's some type of woodland, but it's the wrong type of woodland. But the fact that the UNIS map, the Scottish land cover map, makes a statement that says one of their eligible classes is Scots pine woodland, we think it's reasonable to say, well, you said it was that. It's actually Scots pine. You didn't classify it as that. So you've got this kind of neighbour class error. Again, it's a slightly lower type of error. I hope I'm not getting too confused there, but the idea is to sort of not just go right, wrong, to say when you're kind of almost right and give shades of accuracy here. If we flick on to the next slide, though, this is gets to be a bit more interesting. It now means that we can start to, rather than just giving a map on the left, which is your standard confusion matrix, and we can see that if you just took all the pixels, you're 72% accurate on average. If you just look at all the pixels that contain just a single class, dominant, covered by just grassland, you're 81% accurate. The thing there is that moving up to the 81%, you're throwing away quite a lot of data. So we can come back and talk about that if anyone's interested. But now if we look at like our assessment of grasslands, let's say I'm like primarily interested in grasslands. That's the class I really want to understand. I can then pull that out, and in the report, and these are the reports that we produce from the portal, I can start to see, well, where in this site are the types of places that grasslands are getting confused? What types of habitats are we finding they're getting confused with? And you can also see from the map where that confusion tends to occur. So we think you're getting a bit more information about that. We've also made some statements about this. Adjacent class, sorry, Ellen, adjacent class is talking about adjacent in the hierarchy. So you're thinking about like it's this neighbor, it's in the if it's a woodland, you've said it's a coniferous woodland, it's actually a broadleaf woodland, would be an example of that type of error, and adjacency error in terms of the hierarchical classification. And you get a table that starts to tell you about those types of errors. It also great to see come into the broadleaf woodlands on the right-hand side. If you just took it at face value and just a right, wrong answer, you'd see that you'd say, oh, this map's terrible for woodlands, I can't use it for woodlands. But looking at the fact it's all orange, well, you can use it for woodlands if all you care about is woodland. If all you care about is a woodland, then this map's actually not too bad. There are some areas that it gets quite wrong, but there's lots of areas where it gets it right. As a woodland, it just puts it into slightly the wrong subcategory of woodland. So this idea about trying to give more visibility in the nature of error to help you understand how the map might function on the ground. That's what we're trying to do here with these reports. We also think there's quite a lot of power in this. We haven't fully explored this idea to its end stage yet, but the idea of trying to get under the hood a little bit on error and trying to understand how error is functioning, we think could also then be fed back into understanding how models are working, and actually trying to build up some data sets to help us understand error as a kind of classification thing in its own right. The one thing you'll notice straight away that the limitation of this is our approach hinges on having high quality validation sites. And we've got only a small handful at the moment. One of the long-term objectives we want to think about here is, can we get more people to collect data in this fashion and submit it into the portal? Can we get this idea off the ground as something that actually maybe the community can come together and do? You know, we're not precious about this. We really want this to be kind of open if possible. One of the things I should say though is that our principle has been not to just give away the data. That's not because we're trying to be precious about it. We're very happy to share the habitat data. But we feel that if you give away the high quality data, there's nothing stopping someone picking that up, training a model, throwing it back into the system and saying, hey, look, it's perfect because I've trained my model on your high quality data. I've thrown it back into the system and it's working quite well. This kind of idea about data being thrown back into models and being used to validate stuff is something we also have to be careful about. So we're taking the approach of giving the map results, but if someone wants to get access to the actual data, we're open to have conversations there as well. Would really appreciate some thoughts about how to do that openly and keep stuff protected. Anyway, so moving on. The other thing to say is if you develop the algorithm, we also ask some additional information about just how you've done the algorithm, what kind of steps have you taken, and we give you some feedback about is that that best practice or the ways that you could improve that. I can't remember how many more slides we got. I think
we're just coming right to the end now. So we just had a sort of final point, didn't we, where we were thinking, and this goes back to you saying about us not putting the data set out there, because you know, we're recognizing the AI agents are becoming a sort of standard way of interacting with the geospatial data going forward. So I don't know if you want to make a kind of final point about that, Ian.
Yeah, I think this is Doug's idea about how do we get it's kind of a slight side comment here, but how do you actually get better ways of interacting with map data in the long term? I think Doug's my boss at ELS. His thoughts are that you're going to interact with a mapping tool by just asking it questions. I want to map this thing over there. How accurate is this map? Can you give me a map of all the trees and woodland with an accuracy of 25% or greater? And you know, it's going to be a large language model interface to a map rather than a GIS tool. I'm trying to think about ways of interacting with that better is kind of the idea here. Yeah. And that if we're not careful, the one thing we know about all these large language models is they're really, really confident. You ask it a question and it gives you the wrong answer and you say, I don't think that's quite right. And it goes, you're absolutely right. That was wrong. However, I think this is the answer. No, I don't think you're still quite right. Oh, absolutely correct. Yeah, it's that confidence they have. And if we don't get error in here in some fashion, we'll be on to some problems as people start to bring large language models and mapping data and generative AI together. I think that's really the thought here, thinking a bit further down the line. So it's just to kind of say, you should be trying to come back to the real on the ground data to validate at all possible. I think these are the key messages.
Yeah, this is just our conclusions, really, that we think that the Trustable AI mapping framework is an important improvement, because if you're using that subsample, the errors in if you're using subsample training, then any errors that have come in through your process will compound, but TAiM then is independent, and it covers the whole area, not just as sample points, but as a whole area. And that we're in a way standardizing the error evaluation, which we think is an important thing to do. And we want to be able to offer economies of scale on that, to allow different products to be directly compared. And then we've made some descriptions about the types of error that occur. So we do think that error needs to be represented in geospatial maps, because it reveals the subtlety of how the map's performing. So thank you for listening to our under-rehearsed presentation. We improvised that completely today. We've gone on probably 10 minutes too long, but we've still got a bit of time for questions. So thanks for...
Let me just explain why that is. I was supposed to be coming back last night, but my flight got cancelled. So I had to get an early morning train back instead, and my laptop was here. So it's been a little bit of a guddle. So thank you for bearing with me there.
Yeah, thank you for bearing with us.
Thank you so much, Hannah and Ian. Does anybody have any questions? Just pop your hand up or put it in the chat and we can get going with that.
There was one question from Michael in the chat there that I didn't respond to. Would we be open to developers having access to the data through APIs? Absolutely, but again, we need to think about what access to the data means. If it means the detailed data and we're trying to keep the quality of the accuracy assessment, the validation process up, we have to think carefully about that looping stuff back in. One of the huge problems with these kind of mapping projects is access to high quality data, though. You know, high quality validation data to train models is really important as well. And we think this could be really great data sets to bring it together. So there's some tensions here we need to sort of think about as a community, I think, to be honest.
Okay,
but in essence, absolutely, yeah, no problem with that.
Okay, thanks for answering the question. From my perspective, it's more about us creating habitat maps, and if we can have an API access to, if it's a specific area, just calling it and potentially having a validation check.
Yeah,
just on overhead.
Absolutely. In the long run, absolutely. At the moment, the process is manual, but it's purely manual because of all the problems of mapping up these habitat schemas. Because it's quite complex. One of the things that would allow us to push that into an API was to say, well, we tell you for this site what the habitat schemas are, and you tell us what the best match onto these classes are, and then it could all be done automatically. We haven't, in the context of this 1-year project, we didn't get to that point, but we see that's how we do it. We push that onto the user. That's all API-able. We just declare these are the classes we have. You find the best match.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Eleanor.
Thank you. That's really interesting project. I look forward to having a play with it. I think it'd be very useful. Presumably, this is a sort of not really a question, but presumably, as we still start to use large language models, it will also the AI will be able to use your tool to say, if I say how much grassland is there in Clackmannanshire, it will say, well, according to the habitat map, there's this much, but actually we ran it through the validation, and actually quite a lot of this might be such and such else.
Yeah, I think that
which will, enable it will enhance the quality of the AI to be confidently right rather than confidently.
Yes. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, we'd love it if, the fullness of time, that sort of thing is possible. I think the other point there as well is that at the moment there's a lot of maps that get put out where they publish very scant information on the accuracy, and this is a challenge, I think, as well, about trust. If you're not fully open about what you're up to, now that Living England, regardless of what you think of the actual map itself, the process they've gone through to explore and explain is excellent. But it's still a static document. There's nothing live there about how does it perform over this bit. I think that's the interesting thing that's kind of at the nub of this problem,
Well, my other thought on data, and I think having more validation data, and I think that idea of kind of crowdsourcing, a bit like the NBN Atlas, anyone who's doing anyone doing an NVC survey could add it to the validation database, for example. But then could you, rather than keeping the data secret, as it were, could you keep the kind of locations secret? So you say, here's our crowdsourced data, but we're not going to tell you, or I haven't quite thought this through, but if rather than saying we've tested this on Bunloit, and someone could go to Bunloit and check up on their own data and correct their own map so it looked good. Why do you need to say where your sample plot, your validation plots are, and especially if the number of them grows?
It's interesting. I think at
Maybe
some
I'll
point
leave with you to think about it. It doesn't really need an answer. It's more of a suggestion, I guess.
At some point, there's got to be a spatial map. But if you've got a big enough area, maybe you don't need to know where within that area if your map's big enough. One of the things I come back to is in England, the countryside survey, they do these 1 kilometre grids, really, really detailed, but they never want to tell you where the grid is because that's really important to keep that back.
Yeah.
But maybe if you have something that there's a process but it's behind locked doors, and you say, well, within this, if you map this county, you will get 5 grid points within it. We just won't tell you where, but then in the background, we have something that crunches away and does the test and then gives you a sanitized result.
Yeah.
I think that there could be some interesting stuff there.
Or because there's quite a lot of data set, like National Forest Inventory would be one where they, you kind of want that data in the model, training it, but you don't want to show where it is. And what I really want to know is how accurate is my map. I don't want to know how accurate is the map.
Yes.
I really want, so almost you to, look at, do the map that you showed of your sample plots, but then not show me that, but show me my map with high, low, medium confidence, like saying these areas are often mistaken for the adjacent habitat. These areas are often, the habitat here is too complex for it to be very accurate. That kind of then it's geospatial, but it's actually related to my own shapefile.
That's definitely that's something that we identified as if we can get more funding and get more ideas, but that's where the end game of this is, because that's starting to say something about, we understand how this thing performs generally. This is your site. This is what we might expect over your site. Look at the boundary between the heathland and the peatland. This is often an area where you might expect some uncertainty. Something to target field work. So you don't have to do a UK HAB of the whole site. You can just go to the bits that you might be more interested in to go and have a double check.
And then you start to get to your own tool where you say,
yeah,
I can put in my shapefile and say, I'm looking at where I can create woodland. Yeah. And you can say, well, we've taken all the best maps, we've worked out the good maps, and this is where this is, we can answer your questions with our, so yeah, very, very exciting. Really,
yeah.
See this first page.
But yeah.
Great. That was an excellent discussion. Thank you so much. Is there any more questions? No, I don't think so.
Can I have another one?
Yeah, go for it.
I guess you're using the example map was one that I'm really familiar with and have used a lot. One map, the kind of maps that I feel like it might appear coming forward are more on biodiversity than habitat. I've been thinking a lot about how can we use NBN, and internationally bird indexes, for example, are used a lot internationally for natural capital. And I suppose this is perhaps more a wider map. Are you seeing those kind of maps start to appear, or are you able to use those, or have you got data? What's the outlook on wildlife as opposed to habitat?
I don't have too much experience with that, I'll be honest. I'll let Hannah pick that up. But one of the reasons we focused in on habitat was because there's lots of examples out there. We collected lots of data for other things, but there's no one really producing them wall to wall yet. Do you have any thoughts on the biodiversity side, Hannah?
Yeah, what we're seeing is mapping tools kind of claiming to then have layered those other types of national data set on top through the magic of AI. But that's what they're saying, and then there's no kind of methodology being revealed.
Yes.
So yeah, that's the sort of, that's the whole point, really, isn't it? It's like we've actually got to have this conversation more explicitly and openly in order to ensure that the whole kind of nature tech supported AI generated mapping landscape has some credibility.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Eleanor, for the great, excellent discussion.
Oh, I've had a bit of an AI week. I've suddenly been, I thought I better learn about this stuff or else I'm going to get left behind. So this is timely.
Very much so. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Hannah, did you have any closing thoughts or comments? I've recorded this, so I'll pop it up into the Digital Enablers Basecamp, and we can continue the questions there. And I was just going to ask Hannah and Ian, if people have other questions coming forward, are we able to put your emails into the posting of the recording if people want to get in touch?
Yeah, very happy.
Yeah, absolutely. And if anyone kind of has any ideas for where we could go to find a partner who might help us take this, the next steps further forward, we'd really appreciate that as well. Thank you. Zoe, you've got a question. I think you were kind of you were giving me some disagreeing looks as well.
That's my just my grumpy face coming out. That's no, it's Mark that's got a question.
Cool.
There was more question than a kind of conversation, I suppose, and I realise we've not got too much longer, but I love the fact that you're doing something like this, because I think it's needed. It just feels like, I think what somebody else was saying, it needs to be like API driven. It needs to be something that's we can do computer to computer conversations with.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, how it scales if we don't do that, and what the pathway to get a computer to computer one is like, or is that just AI testing AI all the way down?
No,
Round truth, right?
I think from my point of view, the fact it goes back to real validated data over a real validated site is kind of the key thing. You're not just taking sample points that are separate, you're taking a map that you validated that's over a representative portion of the landscape. I think to scale, there's no way around it. You've just got to get more data sets like that picked up. There has to be more high quality mapping done to validate this stuff. I think the API point, absolutely, totally agree. We really hoped we could get there, but to be perfectly honest, the ecological problem was so difficult to unpick in the first place to map all this stuff together. You know, even just getting over that hurdle just took a huge amount of the project. You know, it was a 1 year Innovate project. Just doing that, it took a huge amount of energy. That's a problem, guys. You know, that is a huge problem, particularly when you've got Scotland using a system that doesn't directly map onto what the rest of the UK is using. I'll put that observation aside, but that's a problem. And the other thing is that we've done one survey over 1 year. Ecosystems change. That half of the area that on the Glensoch site that's been mapped out is currently grassland, but actually the ecologists were saying it is actually Scots pine woodland because it's got Scots pine woodlands that are that big. You know, it's got seedlings in it. Ecologically, that will be a Scots pine woodland, but right now, from a satellite, it's going to be a grassland because it's grassland dominated. So again, we've got a challenge here that this habitat survey, as of now, is going to increasingly get inaccurate as time goes on. So I think that's why the crowdsourcing of data is so important here, trying to get other people's data sets in and trying to find ways to translate them to the different types of mapping that's going on is such an important step. I think we've done one bit on that, but to get the thing working at scale, there's got to be a lot more effort and a lot more energy put into this because it's a big problem, you know.
I wonder what other. Yeah, I totally appreciate all that. That I get it. It has to be done at scale, and also the decisions we're taking on the outputs we're getting from this have to reflect the confidence levels that we're getting and how that varies.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean we can't make decisions. It just means some decisions don't require higher confidence and some just do. So we can use it for some things and not other things, even with lower quality data. It's better
exactly
data. And at some point you get a binary yes, no, but that's often higher when it's anything that's important. Yeah, I find it really interesting. We've done some stuff with a twin span model for the river invertebrate classification tool, where we've done these pristine sites or pristinely measured sites. Didn't have to be pristine sites. And it was something quite similar. So we're taking a sample of the whole of the UK for deeper, for instance. And then we're taking a load of environment variables and feeding it all into like it was a Mahalanobis distance sort of model, a 30-dimensional model. And that may be quite an interesting route for this, use crowdsourced data, because those different aspects can give like a coefficient on the weight in that kind of Mahalanobis space. And I think we could probably do something with that to increase the confidence, you know, and that might be something that's more scalable and we can use maybe a couple of dozen reference sites. We get started for some certain types of habitats anyway. I'm really interested in all this kind of stuff, and I'd love to be part of the conversation if you guys are continuing to work on it. I know how much effort you put in and how much but we need this, right?
Yeah, that's great. No, thanks. It'd be great to keep you in the loop. And I think my final thought is it's one of the things I keep hearing is that Scotland wants to become like the benchmark for high quality credits because we've got such good data collection and good habitats and a good industry around this. But to get there, it means addressing stuff like this is difficult, you know?
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, I suppose Mark's comments have made me think about the importance of reference sites as well. So a number of different code schemes are bringing that methodology of having a reference site against which you're kind of comparing your own nature restoration project. So that, you know, that's something that everybody understands. I wonder if that's a sort of quite useful, not metaphor, but you know, frame of reference for us to be thinking about this within as well. But we've reached 2 o'clock. Sally,
Yes.
you're wanting to wrap us up.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. The next steps will be I'll upload this and we can keep the conversation going on Basecamp. We can put some links to the website and your email addresses, and definitely keep everyone in the loop of what the next steps are.
Brilliant. Thanks,
Great.
everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.